The stars outside the ship flickered like dying embers as the lone freighter slowly glided toward the massive rust-colored station floating in orbit around a dead planet no one even bothered to name anymore. The place was called the Red Dust. Mark it not because of the planet's surface, but because of the dried blood and sand that clung to every corner of its black trade halls. It wasn't on any official map. No laws existed here. It was a place forgotten by most but cherished by those who dealt in things no sane world would tolerate. Smugglers, traffickers, and buyers with too many credits and too little conscience walked these halls without fear or shame. The air inside was thick with smoke from strange alien spices and burning fuel. Lights flickered. Voices in dozens of languages shouted prices, cursed rival deals, and whispered secrets. Cages lined the walls, some filled with rare animals taken from jungle moons or ice planets, others holding people, mostly young, mostly scared. The worst cages were in the back hall, under the lowest ceiling, where even the lights seemed afraid to shine. That's where the catgirls were kept, a species native to a peaceful planet destroyed years ago during a mining war. They were tall and graceful, with fur-covered skin and ears that twitched in every sound, their eyes golden and wild, but dulled by pain and fear. Most buyers didn't ask for names, only weight, age, and price per pound. Through this grim hall walked a human named Daniel. He looked worn out, like he hadn't slept right in weeks. His clothes were plain. His boots scraped the dirty floor as he moved slowly past each stall. He had no reason to be here. He wasn't rich or powerful. He wasn't hunting rare meat or illegal weapons. In truth, he didn't know why he had come to the Red Dust Market at all. Something had pulled him here, something he didn't understand. He stopped near a metal cage on the far end of the hall. Inside were 3 catgirls chained at the wrists. One lay motionless, her ribs showing beneath her matted fur. One crouched in a corner with wide, frightened eyes. The third sat upright, alert despite the bruise on her face. She stared at him through the bars without blinking. Her golden eyes were not afraid. They were angry, proud, and full of something else he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope, the merchant. Behind the cage noticed Daniel and stepped forward with a grin that was missing too many teeth. He spoke in broken trade language, offering a discount if Daniel bought more than one. He listed weight, species value, and even suggested recipes as if he were selling meat for a holiday feast. Daniel didn't respond. He just looked at the girl. With the bruise and the fire in her eyes, the merchant shrugged and named a price so high it made nearby buyers laugh. The amount was more than Daniel had earned in his last 3 jobs. It was enough to buy a small ship or retire on a quiet moon. The merchant turned away, already moving on to another customer, but Daniel didn't move. He kept looking at the girl in the cage. His fingers slowly reached for the pouch at his side. Inside was every last credit he owned. He hadn't even saved enough for fuel to get back off the station, but something inside him had already decided. He stepped forward and dropped the pouch onto the merchant's table. The laugh stopped. The merchant opened the pouch and whistled. He took the credits and shoved a rusty key into Daniel's hand without another word. He barked a command and unlocked the cage. As the door creaked open, the girl flinched but didn't back away. Daniel reached in and gently pulled her out. She stumbled, weak, but caught herself. Her hand rested on his arm for balance, her eyes never leaving his. Without warning, the merchant tossed another figure into Daniel's path. A smaller girl, thin and shaking, barely more than a child. She had wide silver eyes and moved on all fours. "Take that one too," the merchant growled. "Can't sell her. She doesn't talk." Daniel caught her before she fell. She didn't resist. She simply curled close to him like she didn't believe she was still alive, carrying both of them. Daniel walked out of the hall, past rows of buyers who didn't understand why a human with no wealth and no future would trade everything for creatures meant for slaughter. He didn't speak. He didn't look back. Somewhere behind him, another auction began, and the sound of chains rattling followed him down the corridor. He made it to his ship, got the ramp open, and carried the girls inside. The lights flickered as the engine groaned awake. He laid them on blankets, gave them water, and opened a ration pack. They ate slowly, silently. He didn't ask their names. He only said one thing before lifting off from the red dust market. "You're not meat. Not anymore." The ship shook slightly as it left the orbit of the dead planet, its old engine coughing like a tired animal trying to wake after too long in the cold. Inside the dim metal walls, Daniel worked in silence, his hands steady as he adjusted the course on the cracked navigation screen. The girls sat near the storage crates, now turned into a sleeping area, their eyes watching every move he made with the silent curiosity of beings unsure whether they had been freed or simply moved to a different kind of cage. He didn't speak much, but he didn't chain them either, didn't raise his voice, didn't look at them the way the others at the market had looked. And for now that was enough. The older girl, still bruised but healing fast, had begun to move around the ship with a quiet sense of caution. She explored each corner slowly, her ears twitching at every noise. Daniel caught her studying the engine room while pretending to look for food. He didn't stop her. He knew she was trying to understand if this new space was a threat or a shelter. The younger one remained close to the wall, often hiding under the metal bench where the emergency supplies were stored, coming out only when the hunger pulled her forward. She didn't speak, didn't blink much, and only made soft sounds when nightmares visited her sleep. Daniel began repairs on the ship's communication system. The antenna had been broken for weeks, and he had no reason to fix it before. But now things had changed. He had seen too much. He had stepped too far. And deep inside, he knew he couldn't just disappear with these girls and pretend the market didn't exist. So he worked day and night, using salvaged wires and old circuit plates, determined to reconnect with the galaxy he had spent years trying to avoid. The older girl finally spoke on the third day. Her voice was rough from dryness and disuse. She told him her name was Mira. She had once lived on a green planet full of music and wide rivers, before soldiers came, before factories rose, and before her people were hunted for profit. She didn't cry when she spoke. Her voice carried a strength built from pain. She said the younger one was called Lynn. They were not sisters by blood, but had shared the same cage for too long to be anything else. Daniel listened without interrupting. He offered her clean clothes from the old storage locker. He even showed her how to heat food in the ration heater, giving her something to control. She accepted without a smile, but with a nod that felt like a beginning. She asked why he had bought them. He hesitated and said he didn't know. Maybe because he had lost someone once, maybe because he had nothing else left to lose, or maybe because no one else had done it. He didn't want to be a hero. He just didn't want to be part of the silence anymore. Later that night, Mira found him in the control room staring at an old photograph glued to the dashboard, the corners faded and curled. It showed a young girl with wide eyes and messy hair standing in front of a small ship, the same ship they now flew in. Mira didn't ask who she was. She already knew. Pain recognized pain, and silence spoke louder than words. But the quiet didn't. Last, the red dust market had eyes everywhere. Slavers didn't like losing product. The moment Daniel traded his credits and walked away, someone had marked his ship, had sent his face to others who owed favors and hunted for pay. And now, as the ship drifted through a quieter part of space near a broken satellite cluster, something moved in the dark. A small signal blinked red on the radar. Daniel's breath caught. He knew that signal pattern. A hunter drone. Not just any slaver ship, but one of the market's fast trackers built to hunt escapees and deserters. He cut the lights, shut the engines down, ordered complete silence. Mira grabbed Lynn and pulled her into the crawl space under the floor. Daniel loaded the only 2 defense charges he had left and watched the screen as the blip came closer. The silence was thick, enough to choke on. He counted the seconds and remembered the escape routes in his head. He had no weapon strong enough to face the hunter ship. If they found him now, it would all be over, but luck still breathed in his corner. The blip passed, without stopping. Maybe the signal had been weak. Maybe their ship looked too broken to carry anything of value. Or maybe, just maybe, something greater still watched over fools like him who tried to save lives in a world full of monsters. When it was over, Daniel restarted the engine and kept the lights off. He changed direction, altered the navigation codes, and adjusted their heading toward an abandoned relay satellite, where he hoped he could send out a message to someone who still believed in justice. He knew it was risky. If anyone picked up the signal, it could be friend or foe. But staying silent was no longer an option. Mira sat beside him in the control seat now. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand answers. She just watched the stars and said, "They'll come after us again. You know that, right?" Daniel didn't look at her. He just said, "Let them try. I've already made my choice." The ship drifted in the cold stretch of space between forgotten moons and broken satellites, where few dared to travel unless they had something to hide or something to say that no one wanted to hear. Daniel guided the vessel with tired hands, his eyes fixed on the blinking lights of a worn-out console, his thoughts heavy with the weight of choices made and the danger that still followed close behind. Mira sat at the second seat with her eyes moving across the screen as she tried to understand the strange language of navigation and signal frequencies. She had begun asking quiet questions about how ships worked and what the numbers meant. Daniel didn't mind. He explained slowly, showing her each switch and wire, letting her learn at her own pace because deep down he knew that, if anything happened to him, someone else had to be able to take the helm. Lynn had started leaving her corner under the bench more often now. She walked barefoot along the cold metal floor, following Mira like a shadow but watching. Daniel with those big silver eyes that always seemed to be searching for a reason to trust. She didn't speak, not yet, but there was a calmness in her. Now that hadn't been there before. Sometimes she would sit near the engine room and listen to the hum of the ship like it was a song only she could hear. Daniel noticed it. He didn't say anything, but he made sure the heaters stayed on and that extra blankets were always folded nearby. Small gestures maybe, but important ones in a world where kindness had become rare. The satellite finally appeared. On the edge of the scanner, a large rust-covered ring floating alone in silence. Once it had been part of a military network, sending out orders and collecting reports. But now it was abandoned, forgotten by its makers. Perfect for someone like Daniel, who needed a place to send a message without being noticed by the wrong kind of people. He docked the ship slowly, connected the wires by hand, and powered the signal array with a backup generator pulled from the storage bay. Mira watched as he worked, her tail flicking slowly, her ears alert. She asked him who he planned to contact. Daniel paused for a moment, then told her about an old friend from his past. A man named Cole, who used to run with a small resistance group, fighting against illegal trafficking in outer systems. Daniel hadn't spoken to Cole in years, but if anyone still cared about freedom and justice, it would be him. With the signal finally live, Daniel began sending a message through broken channels and encrypted waves. He attached the footage he had recorded from the market, the images of cages and auctions and terrified eyes behind bars. He sent details about the Red Dust Market's location, trade routes, and merchant codes. He added his own name to the message, knowing full well what it meant. There would be no turning back now. No hiding. He had exposed himself to the worst of the galaxy's monsters, but he had also opened a door for others to follow. The transmission went out into the void, bouncing between silent machines and dead stars, hoping to find the ears of someone who still gave a damn. Then they waited. For hours there was no reply. Mira paced the ship while Lynn curled up near the heater, her breathing soft and even. Daniel leaned back in the pilot chair and closed his eyes for a moment, just one moment, but sleep would not. Come dot, it was Mira who saw the signal first. A blinking light on the console. A short coded message that only someone from the Resistance would understand. It simply said, "Received. Help is moving." Relief swept over them like warm air through a frozen room. But it didn't last long. Alarms screamed through the ship's hallway. Motion sensors flared. Mira rushed to the window and saw it first. A small dark vessel sliding from behind the satellite, its wings sharp and curved like the blades of an executioner. A hunter ship from the Red Dust Market. They had found them again. Daniel didn't waste a second. He pulled the ship away from the dock, detached the power cables, and fired up the main engine. Mira jumped into the gunner's seat while Lynn, startled but focused, ran to the auxiliary panel and began copying the actions she had seen Daniel do before. The little girl who once hid under benches was now helping reroute power to the shields. Hunter's ship opened fire. Blasts rocked the sides of the freighter. Sparks flew. Daniel pulled hard on the controls and took the ship into a downward dive through a cluster of abandoned satellites, dodging debris and wreckage as Mira returned fire. Her hands shook at first, but then she focused. Her aim sharpened. One of the hunter's thrusters caught flame, spinning the enemy ship into a broken solar dish. They couldn't win in a direct fight. Daniel knew that. He had to run, had to escape before more arrived. He switched the engines into full power and dove toward a nearby asteroid field where the ship's radar would struggle to follow. They raced through the shadows, weaving between giant rocks and broken mines from an old war long forgotten. Inside the ship, Mira looked at Daniel and saw something she hadn't seen in anyone since the day her world fell. He was afraid, but he didn't stop. He was outmatched, but he didn't give up. He was just one human, but he stood between them and a world that had tried to eat them alive. She turned back to the controls, heart pounding, and knew that this fight wasn't over yet. It was only just beginning. The asteroid field stretched wide like a maze built by giants who had long turned to dust. Sharp rocks spun slowly in open space, while long shadows crept across the ship's hull as Daniel guided the vessel through narrow gaps between floating stone and twisted metal from forgotten wrecks. Every second felt longer than the last, every movement careful and full of risk, but there was no other way. Behind them, the hunter ship had stopped chasing, though no one on board believed it had given up. It was waiting for a better shot or calling for more. Either way, the clock had started ticking, and there was no way to rewind it. Mira tightened her grip on the side of the seat as another rock passed close enough to scrape the paint. She didn't speak, but her eyes moved fast across the radar screen, trying to guess the next move. Daniel trusted her now. She had learned quickly, faster than he expected, and her instincts had become sharp. She had once been a prisoner, but now she was part of the ship, part of the crew, part of the fight. Lynn sat behind them with her fingers moving across the old control board, helping where she could. Daniel had shown her basic commands, and now her small hands moved with surprising confidence. Her silence was no longer fear but focus. She had found something in this chaos, something to protect, something to be. The ship finally broke free of the asteroid belt and drifted toward a dim light. On the edge of the star system, a long-dead relay satellite floated near a ruined station hidden behind a gas cloud. It was the place Daniel had remembered from years ago when resistance fighters used it to hide from patrols. It had no power and no signal, but it had shelter and a small landing dock. He brought the ship down slow, letting the old clamps grab hold of the landing gear as Mira watched through the side window. The place looked empty, but nothing ever stayed empty for long. Once inside the station, Daniel opened the emergency locker and pulled out the portable signal booster he had stored there long ago. He connected it to the ship's transmission line and began a new message, this one, stronger, clearer, aimed directly at the group that had answered before. He didn't ask for much, just help, just back up. Just someone to come and see the truth before it was erased again. While the signal burned across space, Daniel knew the market would not stay silent. They had already sent one hunter, and more would come. They were not just chasing property. They were protecting business, and business in the red dust market was blood deep and built on silence. That night, as they waited in the broken station, Mira spoke about what she had seen at the market before Daniel arrived. She spoke of other girls locked in dark rooms, never allowed to speak or stand. She described auctions where the buyers didn't look at faces, only weight and skin quality. She remembered one girl who tried to run and how the merchant made an example of her. Daniel listened with a face carved from stone, but his hands trembled when she described the walls lined with hooks and chains. Mira said she had seen death too many times and had stopped expecting rescue long ago. Lynn touched her arm, then held it for a long time, and for the first time, Daniel saw Myra close her eyes, not in pain but in memory. There was something sacred in that moment, a kind of healing that didn't need words or promises, only presence. But the peace didn't last. An alert flashed red across the ship's screen. A signal was incoming. Several ships fast-moving, marked with market codes. They had found them again, and this time they weren't alone. Daniel checked the defense systems, but the station had no weapons, no shields. They couldn't outrun them either, not from this distance. There was no time for plans, no time for fear. They had to stand. Daniel looked at Mira and asked her to take the turret gun. He handed Lynn a small pad and told her how to control the power grid from the back room. Then he grabbed the last 2 blasters from the weapon locker and braced himself near the ship's entry ramp. The market ships landed fast, their ramps slamming open as armored guards poured out, ready to take back what they believed was theirs. But this time it wasn't just frightened girls in cages. This time it was a fight. Mira fired the turret with sharp accuracy, hitting the first few guards before they reached the door. Daniel held his ground, trading fire with those who came too close. He moved with the strength of someone who had already made peace with the worst. Lynn kept the power steady, feeding energy to the guns and engines, keeping the ship alive with her tiny hands and steady breath. The battle shook the station walls, sparks flew across the dock floor, and smoke filled the air. Daniel took a hit to the shoulder, but didn't fall. Mira shouted directions from the gun seat, her voice clear and strong. Lynn rerouted power without hesitation, even when explosions lit the hallway behind her. They were 3 against many, but they fought like a force reborn from fire and defiance. Then in the distance, a new signal appeared on the radar. A group of ships approaching fast with resistance codes blinking across their hulls. Help had arrived. The market guards saw it too, and their confidence cracked. The resistance ships opened fire, driving the slavers back and breaking the lines. One by one, the market enforcers fell or fled, and within minutes the battle was over. Daniel dropped to his knees, breathing hard, blood soaking through his shirt. Mira ran to him and helped him stand while Lynn pressed against his side, silent but solid. The red dust market had sent its best and failed. Now the story was out, the evidence had been sent, the blood-stained truth could not be buried anymore. And somewhere deep in space, others like Mira and Lynn heard the signal and began to hope. The battlefield was silent now, only the low humming of cooling engines and the crackling of damaged wires filled the empty space around the old station, while smoke rose slowly from the shattered walls and broken decks. Daniel leaned against the railing, his wounded shoulder wrapped in makeshift bandages as he watched the resistance ships land one after another across the docking platform. His body felt heavy, his breath uneven, but his eyes stayed focused because he knew the fight wasn't over. Just yet, not while others still lived under chains. Myra stood beside him, her clothes stained with dust and smoke, her arms scratched but her back straight. And proud, her golden eyes scanned the horizon, waiting for more trouble. But none came. The enemy had been pushed back, their command ships destroyed their soldiers captured or dead. The resistance had arrived with fire and fury, not a second too soon. Now their people moved to the station with calm efficiency, checking for traps, collecting evidence, and rescuing anyone who might still be hiding in the dark. Lynn moved between the resistance medics like she had always belonged among them, small, quiet and fast. Her hands carried supplies, her eyes watched carefully as she handed out water and wrapped simple bandages around burned wrists and bruised foreheads. No one questioned her, no one saw her as cargo anymore. She had become a helper, someone who brought calm in chaos, someone who reminded them all that even the smallest among them could still be strong. Daniel spoke with the commander of the resistance, a tall woman with tired eyes who had seen too much war and betrayal to be easily impressed. But when she looked at the footage, he had risked everything to send and saw the girls he had saved and heard Mira's voice describing what she had lived through. Something inside her shifted. She promised justice. She promised action, not just for this station, not just for this group, but for every market, like the red dust that still hid behind shadows within. Ours teams were already moving across systems, their ships loaded with data and coordinates to bring down more of the slave rings that had operated without fear for too long. The resistance had been searching for proof, and now they had it. And more, they had survivors who could speak. They had faces the galaxy would listen to. Daniel sat down at the edge of the landing pad, his head tilted back against the wall as he watched stars slowly return to the sky above the smoke. His thoughts wandered to the girl in the old photograph glued to his ship's dashboard, the one who had once called him father, the one he had lost to sickness long before war and darkness found him. He wondered if she would have been proud of what he did today, of the people he stood for, of the lives he helped pull from the fire. Maybe this had been the way to honor her. Maybe this had been the only way he could make peace with a past full of silence. Mira approached him with slow steps and a calm face. Her injuries had been cleaned and her clothes replaced with a simple uniform like those worn by the resistance. She carried herself like someone who had finally remembered her own name, her own value. She sat beside Daniel, not saying much for a long time, just sitting, breathing, watching the same stars he did. Then she finally spoke, saying that many more were still out there, that many more girls had never seen the sky, never tasted freedom, never heard a kind voice. Daniel nodded, knowing she was right, knowing this rescue was not the end, but the beginning of something bigger, something that needed people like her, people who had escaped the fire and were ready to carry light into the places still buried in ash. Lynn came up quietly and held Mira's hand, then reached for Daniel's and squeezed gently. Her silence spoke more than any words could. A kind of quiet trust that had been earned, not given. Daniel looked at them both, and for the first time in years, he smiled, not out of joy, but out of something deeper, a kind of peace that had been missing from him for far too long. When the time came for the resistance to leave, Daniel offered his ship as part of the new network, saying he would go where they needed him, saying he wasn't done yet. Mira agreed to go with him, not as cargo, not as a rescued prisoner, but as a fighter. Lynn stayed with a healer team, for now too young for combat, but not too young to bring hope wherever she went. The red dust market was no more, and its name would be remembered not as a place of wealth, but as a place that broke and burned when truth found it. People across systems began to speak out. New laws started forming, and silent worlds began to stir because one human had decided to spend everything he had, not on weapons, not on power, but on two girls who were never meant to be saved. And in the far reaches of space where stars blinked like forgotten memories, ships now moved with purpose, not for war or greed, but for rescue and justice. And every time Daniel looked up at those stars, he knew he had finally found something worth fighting for, something that would never be sold or silenced again. The end.